Hey everybody, how are you today? So I just wanted to kind of wrap up the chapter with one last video. So pretty much everything that we've been doing in class lately is really kind of surrounded this battles chart. And most of you did a good job doing the battles chart, focusing on why the battle was fought and what were the key developments on it, who won each major battle, what was the significance. So, at this point in time, we've already talked about how the war begins and, Hitler was unstoppable at the beginning. No one knew that he was secret allies with the Russians, and the two of them together were going to take over Poland. And then for the most part, it was going to be kind of a phony war, a Sitzkrieg, a sitting war where no one was really doing any attacking. The Russians were trying to go after the Swedes, the Finnish a little bit, kind of unsuccessfully without the Germans' help as they were kind of fighting the Winter War. Germany was kind of mobilizing for battle, waiting out the winter, and, the British, the French, who had vowed to help the Polish after they were attacked, basically at this point are just kind of mobilizing and preparing. But then the war really kind of, gets underway very quickly as Hitler comes in and he's taking over Belgium, Luxembourg, countries are just falling in a matter of days as he's coming into Denmark. He's unstoppable. It doesn't matter where he goes, he's taking over everything. The Italians are kind of going into Greece, going off of Italy, and they're conquering territory and moving into North Africa. And the two of them together as these Axis powers, as they're starting to kind of, cement themselves with the Japanese, they're just taking over the whole world, honestly. Japan was kind of slow at first, going in from China to French Indochina, like present-day Vietnam, Thailand, and then eventually into some of the different islands, but of course steering clear of the Philippines. France, of course, despite the help of the British, falls to Hitler. There is the miracle at Dunkirk where they're able to, evade capture, and they're able to get many of the British troops out of there. Supposedly part of France is free, and it's this Vichy France, led by Pétain, who's more of a puppet leader. And then there is, occupied France. Charles de Gaulle, who is the true Free France leader, is back off in Morocco, kind of leading a resistance movement there from Casablanca until really the Germans truly take over that territory. And then he's kind of hiding out more. And then, of course, we see that, when the war is beginning, Hitler is trying to take over all of Great Britain. With his Operation Sea Lion, he realizes that as he is fighting at sea, that the British Navy is still, the best Navy in the world. It's difficult for his U-boats, his undersea boots, to really attack and destroy them. He decides to kind of give up on Operation Sea Lion, where he is going to conquer, the British Isles. And so instead, he begins the Blitz with the daily bombings. It's total war. He's attacking the people's morale, destroying their will to fight, but still they refuse to surrender. The U.S. kind of plays a key role at this point because even though the United States refuses to get involved in the war, we want to stay neutral, we don't want to fight another war, we're afraid Americans will die, we say this doesn't involve us. FDR, foresees that we're going to get in the war eventually. He holds the secret meeting with Churchill, and they create the Atlantic Charter, where they talk about how first they would go after Hitler and Mussolini in a war, and then Tojo in Japan based off geography, and based off of, what Hitler has done so far to the rest of the world. They also talk about eventually, creating the United Nations, an international peacekeeping group. And really and truly during this time period, the U.S. further increases its support for Great Britain through its Lend-Lease program, where it's pretty much just giving away supplies to the British, expecting repayment in some sort later. So the U.S. claims to be neutral, but in all reality, we're not really selling any goods truly to the Germans. And we've definitely kind of moved on from our cash and carry policy, where we said we'd sell to anyone as long as they picked it up for themselves. We're definitely kind of showing our true colors at this point. And then, of course, everything changes December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese, under Yamamoto's kind of leadership, surprise America, attack in the early morning of Sunday, December 7th, because they're angry about our cutting off their, oil supply and freezing their financial assets, and they want to take over the world as part of the new order, and we're standing in their way. And so they attack in less than 2 hours, killing 2,400 people. And, we really underestimated them. We never thought that Japan had the technology, that they could attack based off of the geographical conditions. And of course, the next day, things forever change when the president declares this is a date that will live in infamy, and we are now at war with Japan and with Italy and with the US. And so Russia, who we have not really trusted prior to this, is our ally, and Japan and Germany and Italy are enemies. The significance here is the US is really in World War II. So even though the US is really in World War II, we really don't know what action to take next. And it's at this point that, FDR and Churchill meet. Churchill actually decides, as head of Great Britain, to come to the United States. He comes for Christmas, just like a week or two later after the attack on Pearl Harbor, expressing his condolences. And FDR and Churchill talk about what's their plan for the future, how they're going to take on Hitler. How can they really trust Stalin? Could he truly be an ally or not? Because it's really just the three of them up against the world here, up against the Axis powers. And FDR says, I really want to get back at the Japanese. We're so angry because they attacked us, they killed us. So we're going to try to take them on a little bit. Churchill says, great and all, but in all reality, what are we going to do about Hitler? He's the one who's doing these terrible things. They're starting to get more reports of what's going on with the Holocaust and with Jews. It seems like more word is kind of starting to spread. Hitler at this point is starting to move Jews from, ghettos into concentration camps and extermination camps as the Holocaust kind of violence is increasing and kind of word is starting to trickle out after they're having that Wannsee conference about the final solution. So, yeah, what's the plan here? And they decide that they are going to go after Hitler as they agreed, and really go after Mussolini because he's kind of the weak link. So they decide they're going to be attacking after the U.S. troops are trained, of course. They have to find a way to get him to cross the Atlantic Ocean, and then they will go in and attack Africa, eventually go into Italy, take out Mussolini, eventually reclaim France, go through Belgium, and get to Germany and take out Adolf Hitler. And so that part of the war will be over, and then the British claim they will help us to take out the Japanese. But in all reality, America isn't truly satisfied with this, and the Americans decide that they really want to get revenge, if I flip to the Pacific part of the chart, on the Japanese. And so the U.S. basically to try to strike back at Japan and to try to strike fear into the hearts of the Japanese to show them that we can still attack them. We decide that we're going to try to attack Japan directly and go after Tokyo. We're not really looking to go after civilians. We just want to go after military bases, just like they went after Pearl Harbor. And if civilians get injured in the process, so be it. But that's our goal, is just to really go after bases, weaponry, soldiers. And it's not going to be easy to do because Japan is so far from the United States. And immediately after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan goes on this tirade and they take over pretty much the Philippines as well as the rest of Asia. And as we talked about last week, we see that the Japanese are brutal to the people in the Philippines. General MacArthur has to escape. He goes off and hides in Australia under the command of the president. FDR tells him to kind of run away. And the Americans are mistreated, as well as the Filipino soldiers. They're forced to march to this camp across the island. Many of them die, as up to 10,000 American soldiers die. So it's pretty rough and brutal. So we really kind of want revenge on Japan. We want to gain back the Philippines, but it's not going to be easy because it's so far from the U.S. So we take one of our aircraft carriers. We get a little bit closer to Midway Island, which is not too far from Pearl Harbor. And we decide that we are going to launch this raid, launch this attack on Japan. To be able to fly off this aircraft carrier and fly this long distance, we're going to have to fly a B-25 plane. The only problem is, even though this plane has a larger gas tank and it can fly the long distance, it's not going to be able to land back on the aircraft carrier because it needs a longer runway to land. And so it's going to have to try to land in China. Hopefully, at least we were hoping it could land in China on, kind of one of the areas that was safe because China was our ally, and not in one of the areas that was occupied by the Japanese. Unfortunately for several of our pilots, that was not the case, as they were shot down or forced to land in China. They were captured by the Japanese. They were tortured and they were executed. And we kind of constructed minimal damage on Tokyo, but we considered this somewhat of a moral victory since we showed Japan we would fight back and we could get revenge at them, and even though they were well protected and surrounded, we could still hit them. Now, Japan has definitely created this greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. They have taken over the vast majority at the Pacific at this time. If we kind of look at the map, you can remember that they have taken over all of this area in red, and so it's going to be very difficult for us to try to take kind of reclaim this territory. And so it next looked like, remember, Japan was going to try to take over this area of Papua New Guinea, and then perhaps even invade Australia, because Australia is owned by Great Britain, and then they could find another way to basically attack the British directly, since they can't take over the actual island of Britain, and that would give them resources and materials. And so there's this major battle, remember, at Coral Sea. It's entirely a battle fought in air, where it's planes launching from the American aircraft carriers versus the Japanese aircraft carriers, and we are shooting them down. We're able to basically outfly them. We're taking heavy casualties, and we suffer huge losses, but we are able to stop this invasion into Australia. And this invasion, or I should say this battle, was happening almost at the same time as the Battle of Midway, and that's because the Japanese, after we really attacked Tokyo as part of those Doolittle raids, they were so angry, and they decided they couldn't decide what to attack first. Should they kind of take over more territory here in New Guinea and perhaps go after Australia, or should they go after Midway? And they kind of decided to divide up their forces and do both basically at the same time. They really thought they could attack Midway, and then perhaps go into attacking Pearl Harbor, and then maybe even California, or who knows what was next. But obviously that is not going to happen because we are going to stop them. And we talked about this last week. Part of the reason why we are able to stop them is because we have been cracking their codes, and we talked last week about the importance of codes. The Germans used their code machines like Enigma, and the Japanese used their code machines like Code Purple and Code Red, as well as their own naval codes. We're able to break those codes and figure out kind of what their strategies are, so we kind of know where they're going to be and how to stop them. And in terms of the naval code, the Americans break that naval code. We identify Midway as the next target, and so we're ready for them. So when they show up in the early morning, we're ready. We're going to be able to destroy their planes, take out their battleships, take out some of their aircraft carriers. It's going to be a huge loss for them. They're going to be forced to retreat. And so this is really the turning point in the Pacific campaign. From here on out, the Japanese are going to really be on the defense rather than, the offense. They're never going to, really have the possibility of expanding even further. This is as far as they got here with this red line. They're not going to be able to take over more territory. It's also during this time period that we're going to be creating, our own military codes, because we realize the importance of codes and sending messages. And up until this point, it was very difficult to send messages. You would write a message, you'd give it to someone who would encode it, and then they would send it, and then it'd have to be decoded. It would take forever. And so during this time period, we start using Navajo Indians who speak the Navajo language. Very few white people speak this language, and they can use real words like egg, and instead that's going to now mean bomb, and they've memorized this list of when you say egg, it means bomb, and they basically can just talk to each other and send each other messages and then decode them, so it only takes a matter of minutes rather than hours to send a message and to receive it. The code is never broken, and this is going to be one of those things that's really useful in the Battle of Guadalcanal. It's going to be one of the first major land victories for the U.S. as we're retaking territory that the Japanese had taken. It's one step closer for us as we're trying to island hop and get closer to Japan to actually invade it and attack it. And we're able to really do this successfully because of the Navajo code talkers, giving us the ability to send these messages in this very kind of secret language, so to speak, so that no one else really knows. And then we kind of switched gears today, and we talked about, we went back to the European front today, and we spent most of our time in class today after kind of reviewing a bit, focusing on the European front side of things. So when it comes to the European front, we talked about how, well, all that's happening in the Pacific. Even though it's not really the Americans' goal to fight in the Pacific, we basically have to because the Japanese are provoking us and they're taking over everything in the Pacific. They're attacking Americans stationed in the Philippines. And so we're just trying to protect those troops. We're unable to, but then we're just trying to stop them from advancing further. We're trying to protect, the Australians, and we're doing our bit. But the main focus is really on trying to take out Hitler and Mussolini and then go after Tojo and the Japanese. So, after we get into the war, the big focus, of course, is how do we cross the Atlantic Ocean? And in many ways, this is the longest battle of the war because we're just fighting this battle continuously. Even before we were officially in World War II, we were basically part of the Battle of the Atlantic because we claimed we were neutral, but I said this earlier, we were actually selling goods to, the Germans a little bit in the very beginning, but not really. And we were, we claimed we were selling to both sides. We really weren't. We would sell like one thing to the Germans. It was pretty much all to the Allies. And then we stopped very early on. This made the Germans mad. They were using their U-boats to sink our ships. We were using the cash and carry policy, which said, we were only selling stuff if they picked it up. But in reality, we were doing some deliveries. This was making us mad. But we weren't going to let it get us pushed into war the way we did in World War I. So we kind of switched gears and went to that Lend-Lease policy, where yet again, we were giving stuff to the British mostly, since everybody else had been conquered by Hitler, pretty much for free and just saying, pay us back later. And for the most part, they were picking it up. But there were times when we were kind of illegally delivering it, and we were angry that, the German U-boats and subs were attacking us, which is why I say it was kind of the longest battle of the war, because even when we were officially in it, we were still being affected. And then once we did officially get involved in the war, we would take all sorts of protections to try to cross the Atlantic safely. We would put blackout curtains on boats so that as a Luftwaffe came by, they would be difficult for them to spot us. There'd be no light shining out, so they couldn't hit us. We developed sonar so that we could detect if German U-boats were close to our other submarines, so that we could move away from them, or so we could torpedo them. And we of course use the convoy system to move from one place to the other, just like we did in World War I. Remember, with the convoy system, it's basically this idea that, let's see if I have a picture of it. I don't know if I have a good picture of it, really. I don't think so. But with the convoy system, remember, you've got one boat and it's surrounded by many other boats, just like in World War I. So the main boat that has the guns, the planes, the tank parts, the soldiers is going to be protected as it's surrounded by all these other boats. Compared to getting attacked by some, German destroyer or cruiser or something, you're going to be fine because you're surrounded by all your good guys, all your allies. And that's how they were able to finally get their supplies over there. So this part, we did handwritten notes in class today. And the thing here to mention is that, as I said, we really wanted to focus on taking out Mussolini and Hitler and then going after Tojo. They just felt like it was, the geographically easier thing to do. They thought it'd be really hard to get to Japan because they'd really surrounded themselves, with all these other countries, and they'd taken over them. But unlike Europe, where everything is landlocked, in Japan, everything is really spread out. So it's difficult to fly that far into fuel and supplies and things like that. So we didn't actually go after Mussolini directly or Hitler because Mussolini is safe in Italy and Hitler is safe in Germany, and it's going to take a while to retake France and then eventually get to Hitler. So we decided to go after Mussolini first, and we decided before we even go after him directly in Italy, we're going to go after this territory in Northern Africa. So the Americans, we landed on the western coast of Africa here in Morocco. We're going to retake the city of Casablanca. We're going to meet up with Charles de Gaulle, who's the leader of Free France, and he's going to give us some advice about how to eventually free France. And it's going to be pretty easy for the American troops to conquer North Africa as we go from Morocco into Algeria to Tunisia to Libya and into Egypt, because there's not a lot of troops stationed there. there's not a lot of Axis powers there. The troops that are there are Italian troops. The Italian troops were stationed in France, in Italy, and mostly here in Africa. They were spaced far apart. They were tired, they were thirsty, they lacked access to water. They've never been as well trained, they don't have the best guns. Some of their generals are weak. I mean, we never even really talk about any amazing Italian generals, and that's just because they're not as superior, perhaps, to some of the British or the American generals in terms of their strategies and plans. And so the Americans were pretty crazy. We're willing to fight to the death. We know that we're going to have casualties. Our tanks are of better quality compared to these Italian weaponry. And we're able to basically just bust down through and retake most of North Africa here. The only real resistance we're going to meet is once we get to Egypt, closer to Alexandria. We're going to be fighting some major battles at El Aman, near the Suez Canal, and that's because the Germans are stationed in Egypt, specifically the Africa Corps led by Erwin Rommel. But all these Italian troops really won't kind of, be a difficult fight for us. And the Americans are being led at this point by George S. Patton, who's one of the greatest generals in American history, has all sorts of tactics and training and is ruthless. And he's really reporting to General Eisenhower, who goes on to be one of the greatest, American presidents in the 1950s. And, he's got all sorts of, ideas about how to win this war. When you're thinking about different generals, you've got 1-star and 2-star and 3-star and 4-star. Greatest general of all time, of course, the only 5-star general in history is George Washington. The other generals that are up there, General Patton is one of the best ones, but his boss actually was General Eisenhower, who was in charge of all of the African campaign and all the troops in Europe, in charge of the D-Day invasion, and he's kind of really the hero of World War II. It's why he goes on to become a U.S. president after. And so the major battle, as I was saying, is really going to be played out in Egypt, near Alexandria. It's called the Battle of El Alamein, and the Italians have really been conquered, taken prisoners. Some of them retreated back to Italy. And so the big battle here in Egypt, it is some Italian troops, but they're really kind of being told what to do so more by General Rommel and his Africa Corps. Remember, he's called the Desert Fox. I posted a video a couple weeks ago about him, about how he was the Hitler's bodyguard, wrote a book about Hitler, liked to be in the action up front so he could really see what was happening, could use the geography to his advantage. He's going up against the British troops being led by Bernard Montgomery, who was by far one of the greatest British generals, and also George Patton, who's really working for Eisenhower. And the fact that Montgomery now has so many troops with him, he's able to overwhelm the Germans, despite the fact that they are very brave and courageous. And so he forces them to basically, you either can surrender, or you can, die of dehydration, or you can just fight to the death till every last man is standing. Rommel wants to surrender. Hitler refuses to. He basically is like, whoops, I guess I lost that memo that I wasn't supposed to surrender. He surrenders anyway. He later tells the Fuhrer, you wouldn't want to spill every last drop of German blood. And, there's a time to advance and there's a time to kind of retreat. And I shouldn't really say that he surrenders. It's more so that he withdraws, because Rommel basically pulls his troops out of there. They're going to end up fighting in Italy and in Europe, and Rommel actually will later be in France as they're kind of trying to fight back against some of the other forces as Americans are trying to invade and such. So pretty much the Germans are being pushed out of northern Africa as well, and there's not a whole lot of fighting in the central part of Africa where the Sahara Desert is. You obviously need to have a water source to survive. And in southern Africa, yes, the British have territory there, and the Germans kind of control Rwanda. There's not a ton of actual fighting, though, in those areas. So even though this is a world war, it is still kind of only truly in certain areas. You might be expected, if you're controlled by another country, to send troops, but there's not always necessarily fighting, in your hometown. And this is a good map. It really kind of shows what I'm talking about here, how, the Americans obviously got attacked December 7th of 41, and then it takes them several months to train their troops and to mobilize. To cross the Atlantic is difficult. And then the U.S. troops are going to come in here in November of 42 and quickly take over these different cities in Morocco, including Casablanca. And then they're going to be retaking parts of Algeria, into Tunisia, and then eventually into Libya and then, into Egypt. And we really see that by May of 43, most of the German troops have either surrendered portions of North Africa or retreated. There's no real threat by the Axis powers at this point in Africa. You can see Patton there on the right and Eisenhower on the left, as they're very proud of their victories. And, now they really can focus their efforts on going into Italy and attacking. And this is what they're going to do. You can see it in the map here, where they're going to be leaving like Tunis, not too far, part of Tunisia, and then they're going to be crossing. It's pretty close, actually. They're in the Mediterranean over to Sicily. That's where my ancestors are from. And then they're going to be going into Italy, marching north, past Florence, past Naples, into Rome, where Mussolini is, and they're going to try to force him out of power or execute him if necessary and take out one of the Axis powers. That's at least the plan. And so the Allies meet yet again at the Casablanca Conference, where you've got Stalin and FDR and Churchill meeting, and Stalin pretty much says, look, I want to take Mussolini out just like you guys, but I can't really help. I'm overwhelmed at this point because the Germans are attacking Russia hardcore. And so he says, you guys are going to have to do whatever you want. But they still kind of all agree. They're going to try to go after Mussolini and then Hitler, and then they'll go after Japan. And suppose that they're going to help each other. The Americans really don't trust Stalin all that much, though, especially because he's a communist, and because at the beginning of the war, he was on the same side as Hitler. They also agree, though, kind of savagely, to start bombing Germany every day. They're going to be bombing Germany with 53,000 tons of bombs every month, which is crazy. They were hoping to basically get back at the Germans. Churchill was all about this. This was no different than what the Germans had done to the British, part of the Blitz, right? They attacked the city every day and killed women, children, families. And so we're just basically redoing to the Germans what they did to the British. And it's supposed to be a total war, attacking civilians and soldiers alike. It's supposed to break their morale, but it does not. They won't surrender, perhaps out of fear, perhaps they still love their Führer, perhaps they have mixed feelings. So at this point, they're going to be launching the last invasion led by Patton and Eisenhower. And in July of 1943, it's going to go very quickly, where they attack Sicily, and then they move north through Italy, and they're going to be trying to get a hold of Mussolini. They think they have Mussolini, and he sneaks through their grasp. The Germans come down. You can see that green part at the top of the map. That's part of the German Empire, because remember, Germany, before the war even began, they had conquered Austria, and they had conquered Czechoslovakia, and all these territories, and most of the people were actually happy, besides the Czechs, to be part of Germany. They loved Hitler, wanted to have his baby and all, and were pretty crazy, didn't realize what was going to happen, were very naive. And so the Germans really aren't that far. They decide to march in. They're going to try to save Mussolini, put him back into power, even though Victor Emmanuel III officially is deposing him at this point, saying, I am the true leader again. Mussolini is not your leader. I made a mistake 20 years ago when I agreed to step down and make a fascist state in this country. The Pope basically is, reneging and taking back his allegiance to Mussolini and saying that, he was wrong, he was fearful, he should have never agreed to such a government, especially as more and more reports are starting to slowly trickle out about how Italian Jews are being treated, but there's still very little knowledge at this point about the concentration camps and the extermination camps and how Italian Jews are being treated just like German Jews. The last real major battle for Italy is going to take place. It's going to go on for 5 months in the town of Anzio. It's not too far from Rome itself. The Allies are just really going to overpower the Germans and the Italians, willing to fight to the death, and they take heavy casualties. We're talking about 300,000 Allies dying. That's huge, guys. There were only 116,000 total American deaths in all of World War I. Now we've got 300,000 in just one battle. Now there are some British troops in there as well, but for the most part it's mostly Americans. And finally we're able to force them to surrender. And then eventually Mussolini has somewhat of a quick trial, and then he is executed. They chop off his head in front of a crowd. And so Hitler, of course, is very angry. He's very fearful. We're overjoyed. There's one less bad guy to face. Hitler at this point goes through France. There is no more Free France or Vichy France. It's all completely occupied. He's getting more paranoid. There's threats on Hitler's life. He's very fearful of what's to come. And so he's kind of pushing his troops into different places in France, kind of cementing his territory, because remember, he still controls all of Europe. Italy is down, Greece is going to be somewhat liberated at this point, so all the territories that Italy once controlled. But that's it. Hitler still has troops all over Europe for the most part. And he has troops stationed throughout all of Europe, but remember, he is also really focusing his efforts for the most part on Russia. And it's going to be, remember, that Hitler continues his siege and his attack on the Russians. He had started Operation Barbarossa way back in 1940 into 41. He had, shown the world that he really hated Stalin. He never could be friends with the communists. He went after Leningrad because it was full of supplies. He also went after Moscow and the Ukraine in the south. He wanted resources. He wanted to destroy Leningrad because it was named after Lenin, the communist leader who had helped create, Russia as a communist country. Now he wants to go after Stalingrad because it has a train station, it has resources, it's near the Volga River, it's named after Stalin himself. It would be a slap in the face if it was destroyed. Early on, this war is going to go on for almost 2 years, and early on, the Germans take 9/10 of Stalingrad. They surround the city. People are starving. They're turning yet again to cannibalism. They're eating rats. The Germans take the fight from house to house. People are getting, just killed. Casualty rates are huge. This goes down as perhaps the bloodiest battle ever in all of world history, with anywhere from 1.5 million to 2 million casualties. It's ridiculous. The people are willing to fight to the death, though. The Russians are tough. They're not just going to give up, the civilian population included. Remember that the Russians, many of them, would burn down their own homes or destroy their farms, whatever it took in terms of a scorched earth policy to fight and make sure that the Germans did not conquer them. And the Russians have been like that historically. Once it was a very bad winter, and the Germans were running low on food and supplies and didn't have warm enough uniforms, another Russian group of reinforcements came in. It was during a blizzard. They used the weather as their advantage. The Germans were weak and exhausted. They were wearing warmer clothing, these Russians, and dressed in white to blend in with the snow. They surrounded the Germans, and the Germans were going to starve to death. Commander Friedrich von Paulus specifically asked Hitler if they could surrender, and Hitler said no, which is pretty crazy. And they surrendered anyway, because they're like, well, we're going to die no matter what. This is the turning point in the European theater, because at this point, the Russians now go on the offense. They push Germans out of Russia, back into Poland, back through Poland, and now basically it's a race to Berlin to see who can get to Hitler first. Will it be the Americans or will it be the Russians? But they both want to destroy Adolf Hitler and bring this war to a close and perhaps get revenge on them. Now, the actual attack on Hitler, though, before we get to kind of that final battle, we've got 2 more battles left in the European campaign. Before they have these, before we mention the last 2 battles, though, we've got the Tehran Conference. That's held in November of 1943, where Stalin and Churchill and FDR agree, yet again, they're going to free the French, then they're going to destroy Germany, and they're both going to do it together. The Germans and the Russians both want to help to destroy Hitler, and then they're going to go after Japan. But supposedly they're all going to help the Americans, even though the U.S. is very kind of unconvinced that this will really happen. And it's during this time period that the U.S. Says, let's plan our attack on Germany. And the attack on Germany takes years to do. It's being led by Eisenhower. I didn't type that in the box, but I can. And it's led by General Eisenhower for the Allies and by General Patton. And we don't just go in and attack. Instead, we come up with this plan called Operation Fortitude, where we basically plan for years to attack, okay? We plan for years to attack, France, so that we can free the French and then eventually use France and go in through Belgium and go to Germany. So what we do in Operation Fortitude is we make Hitler believe that the attack on France is going to happen at Calais. It seemed logical, and if you see it in this map here, I'll make it bigger so you can see, okay? It seemed logical when you're looking at the map that, we were either going to attack at Normandy or that we were going to attack at Calais, and it's basically just because of the weather there, the beaches. Could you get out of a boat? Could you wade through water? Could you launch an invasion from that point? And so Hitler knows it's probably going to be Calais or Normandy, so it's up to us as Americans to convince him that the attack is actually going to happen at Calais. So Operation Fortitude is all about brains over brawn, where we create this fake camp in Great Britain, basically directly across from Calais, to make it seem like we are building tanks and we're moving into planes and soldiers and all this stuff into place so that we could just then cross the English Channel, get to Calais and attack. And if you watch the video clip I posted, they'll show you literally that tank, they're able to move it because it's no different than like a blow-up air mattress. It's just a blow-up tank. And they would hold the stuff down with basically just balloon weights. And they would send in fake radio traffic. They would have, fake smoke and, signals and, sound so that it seemed like a real attack was coming. So Hitler has most of his troops at Calais and not at Normandy like he should. The real attack itself is called Operation Overlord, or D-Day, as Eisenhower's troops tended to call it. They tended to call it D-Day because, I don't know, it was shorter, easier, more code-like. And